Good morning, Lenore.
Morning, Bridie.
Good morning, Mike.
Hi, Bridie.
And good morning, Patrick.
Morning, Bridie.
This week, The Guardian has revealed that computer programs will generate funding plans for NDIS participants with very little human involvement. What are the potential issues with this, Lenore?
Oh, quite a lot. This was an exclusive story by Kate Lyons. I mean, the department says that this new tool will provide for sort of simpler and fairer assessments of NDIS applications. Basically, when someone's now going to apply to be an NDIS participant, they get assessed by a human, they have a questionnaire, and then all that information gets fed into this kind of computer tool and a plan gets spat out. And there's no human oversight at the end of that process. And even if you successfully appeal, any new information just gets fed back into the computer. So I guess the government is saying it'll be more standardised, it will reduce human error. But what a lot of NDIS participants and people in the sector say is it's so complicated, the kinds of diagnoses people have, the kinds of medical information that needs to get fed in. Removing that human oversight is, in their minds, a really big problem. And I guess the government is trying to cap the NDIS budget because it's just going up and up, but they're doing it by trying to reduce people coming into the system rather than focusing on the fraud or the lack of oversight of how the services are delivered. And I guess that's another potential problem that people have with the approach.
And I think philosophically it's a step away from the foundations of why the NDIS was formed in the beginning, which was to really allow the government to give money, to give packages to people with disabilities and their families, and those people and those families to decide how that money should be spent in their own interest. In this way, it's a very templated approach to how the government funds these packages. I think there's questions around how much flexibility there'll be in there for, as Lenore says, different complex diagnoses, different complex needs of families.
And if there's anything complex, it's that kind of an application, right? It's inherently complicated.
Exactly, yeah. So, look, I think there's questions about how this will practically work when it comes into force mid-next year. Obviously, there were a lot of questions from advocates, from families around its operation.
Yeah, I think as Lenore alluded to, the context of this is the government is trying to save a lot of money from the NDIS budget, which has ballooned well beyond...
Which they need to, right? It can't be uncapped. Yeah.
How it was initially conceived. And Mark Butler spoke to this at the National Press Club a few months ago. He identified two kind of areas where that should happen. One was fraud, which no one could possibly be against, rooting out fraud of basically vulnerable people and the taxpayer. And the other was the huge growth in young people with, as he described it, mild to moderate developmental delays and autism coming onto the scheme, which has been the huge growth area in recent years. But this new program kind of makes people, I think that it's also going to be about moving people off the scheme who actually should be on it without any oversight. And that's why people are so upset about it.
He put a target on. He said he wanted the growth in rate of new participants to come down from 12% to 5 to 6%. And it's not entirely clear what that is based on or what criteria that is based on.
But also just coming back to that point, I think about the fraud aspect of it. Definitely people want that crackdown, but there's a real debate around whether it is a good thing to be limiting the amount of NDIS funding for people with for children with mild to moderate developmental delays, things like autism, because where else do they turn for funding?
Well,
state government funding has been,
right?
has been cut in those areas. There's supposed to be these foundational supports that the state governments and territories are being putting in place, but we're not seeing it at the moment. And families go through crises, and also the earlier that you can intervene in these processes, the better it is for children as well.
But I do think part of what the Commonwealth's dealing with is the NDIS was set up and it was sort of functional, and people naturally turned to it because they could get help there, and the state governments then defunded or didn't fund programs that were supposed to sit side by side with it. I mean, that's part of what they're dealing with here as well.
And the government has had experience with automation before within the public service. What lessons should have been learned from those?
Robodebt. It's basically having human in human services. And this is a bit different from robodebt, we need to say, to be fair, because in the NDIS case, there is a human involved in the assessment at the outset before it all gets fed into the machine, whereas robo-debt was robo sort of from the outset. But the robo-debt Royal Commission did recommend that there needed to be more oversight of automated decision-making, not less. So I think there's just a sort of a general salutary lesson about what happens if you take human oversight away from really crucial human services.
We should be clear that there is a role for a certain amount of automation in these kind of extremely, systems that are trying to deal with an awful lot of people would require massive amounts of staff to do it without any kinds of automation. And there can be a role in kind of standardizing, trying to make sure that people with comparable conditions get comparable outcomes.
Fair, yeah.
That part of it is entirely reasonable. And as we've reported before, the people who should be on the NDIS according to its criteria have struggled to get on it, and this is particularly the case for certain people. Older people, women, and people in regional areas, as we reported recently, are disadvantaged compared with people with similar conditions. And that's the kind of thing that you would hope might be evened out by a level of automation, but obviously the fear is that if it goes too far, then it's evening out too much and not taking into account people's particular circumstances, which is, as Patrick said, this is the whole way the NDIS was supposed to be designed, that it is tailored to people's individual needs.
Yeah, I think another troubling aspect for families and advocates in this area is the limiting of the right to appeal in these circumstances. So if an assessment is made and it comes out and people are unhappy with it, basically they still have a right to appeal, but when that appeal is determined, it goes then back into the machine.
They can put more information.
They can put more information into it, but really it's still a computer making the assessment in the end anyway.
And I think, mostly people come to try to access these services at a time of great stress, like you've been diagnosed with something, or you've suffered something that gives you a disability, or you're trying to access aged care, or you're unemployed, and you're trying to access Centrelink. So there's like a human need to have your needs heard, which makes it even harder when you're butting up against a machine.
The element of vulnerability in this particular case, I think, makes it especially serious as well. And The Guardian has also been reporting on automating of another service called robo-tax. There has been a lot of criticism of that scheme, and the government paused it and then relaunched it. What has changed there since their initial concept of it?
So this is something that Jonathan Barrett has been writing about for us for a very long time. And basically it's where the tax office had sort of put debts on hold for a really long time, and often when the taxpayer didn't even know that they had a debt on hold. And then, I don't know, when automation gets better or they revive that debt, many, many, many years later, often so many years later that you're not even required to keep documentation anymore. And when that first happened, and Jonathan was writing a lot about it, it was criticised by the tax ombudsman, and the government paused it. But now they're reviving it again to try and raise $5.3 billion from 325,000 taxpayers. Again, kind of by trying to, through automation, revive these uneconomical to pursue tax debts, historical tax debts.
Yes, and it feels very unfair. Also, the money is taken out of potential refunds automatically. They've used debt collectors to recoup these debts, and it's just another example of people feeling kind of crushed and alienated by an uncaring bureaucracy that shouldn't be that hard to fix.
I think just picking up on another point you made about the outsourcing from the public service to private debt collection is a really big area that Jonathan Barrett has been doing some reporting on. So these debts go to private collection agencies who run call centres with people who are required to meet targets, ringing up and hassling people about their debts. And there's been kind of an interesting outsourcing from the public sector across a whole bunch of agencies like Centrelink. They're also outsourcing all these jobs around call centres and customer service roles, and they're also using AI to make some of these decisions on the back end. We don't know exactly to what extent, but that's certainly something that they're keen on doing, involving AI in trying to improve government services. But for people on the other end of it, if you're trying to get something done with Centrelink, it can be incredibly frustrating talking to someone who doesn't necessarily have the authority to solve the problem that you're coming up against.
That's if you're lucky enough to talk to someone.
Exactly.
Finding
Yeah.
a human is
Yeah.
the first challenge.
The difference just in the past 8 years between having my first child and now, the difficulty in trying to talk to a human, I think is hugely noticeable. But how do you think the government can strike a balance between dealing with vulnerable people and using automation in a useful way?
I mean, I think that's the big question, because obviously, you know, these huge service delivery departments, as Mike was saying, do use a degree of AI and automation and robotic processes and kind of need to do their jobs. Like, it's not unreasonable for them to be looking at that. But they need to have enough human oversight that the services work for the people trying to use the services. And getting that balance right is what's really hard. And I guess what sort of concerns me is that everyone's sort of looking at AI as this sort of economic panacea. I mean, even the GDP figures that came out this week showed the economy was growing the fastest annual rate in more than 2 years because of investment in data centres and artificial intelligence. So if you're a politician or a business, like, this looks like, hello, here's the path forward to profitability. But there's got to be a sense of what services are you giving to people and how will this impact on people? And with the lesson of robo-debt, how might it backfire?
It's really dangerous if people lose faith in big government organisations like the tax office, and no one likes paying tax. Well, most people don't like paying tax. Some people disagree with it profoundly. Some people think it's kind of a necessary, you should pay tax. But no one loves the tax office, right? But if you make it feel like it's pursuing people with minor debts and disregarding people with bigger debts, and similarly with the NDIS or with the welfare system, if people feel that it's targeting the people who it's kind of meant to be serving, it kind of undermines people's faith in the big public bureaucracies, which is kind of undermining faith in government itself.
I think the big attraction for Labor in this is that they're under immense pressure to rein back public spending. Last week we learnt that Katie Gallagher, the Public Service Minister, had written to departments asking them to find 5% savings across their budgets. So departments are under immense pressure to reduce spending. They've also got the efficiency dividend of 1% per year. But they still have to. They've got more demands on from the public to deliver services. So how are they going to do that? How are they going to square that circle? And I think that's why AI and automated processes are so attractive to the government and to the public service at the moment.
Well, we're having this conversation in the same week the government has released their national AI plan. What did you make of it?
Well, it didn't have any proposal to have legislation or very sort of strict guidelines around high-risk AI uses, which I think is problematic. This is a technology that is going to transform everything. It's going to happen. It's going to be used by governments. I feel like there needs to be guardrails around it, and it didn't feel like there were very many.
It was all very vague, I thought. There was a surprising lack of detail in it. I think the Australian public probably deserves a bit more transparency around the use of AI in government.
And now it's time for what we can't get out of our heads this week. Mike, what was that for you?
So I've been kind of transfixed by the emergence of this new left-wing party in the UK, now officially called Your Party. This is a party that was started by, kind of hard to say who, Jeremy Corbyn is involved, the former Labor leader, now independent MP, also a Labor MP who then quit the party, Azara Sultana, and there were 4 other MPs elected at the last election loosely on Gaza issues. The headline on our main story about it was, we had 6 MPs and 4 factions inside the Your Party's toxic power struggles. And it's a quite amazing story of the faction fighting within this new party, which is set up sort of obviously based on dissatisfaction with the way the Labor government is going in the UK. And supporters of Jeremy Corbyn went into the offices at 3 a.m. in the morning to change the passwords on the computer systems to prevent Zara Sultana from gaining access to some data. And there are a lot of comic elements, but it's also kind of tragic, I think, because it's really understandable that people in Britain would be looking for an alternative to Labor. But rather than starting a new party, and there's also already the Greens as well, who have been rising in the polls. But unless their priority is firstly to move the UK to a different electoral system, proportional or preferential, then all they're going to achieve by further fragmenting the left is to pave the way for Nigel Farage to be in government the next election.
Patrick, what about you? What could you not get out of your head this week?
I think it's a bit of a sad story, but an e-bike rider in Sydney was killed on Tuesday morning on George Street. And it sparked a big debate here about the use of e-bikes. The government's threatening to bring in new rules around limiting their power and speed and so on, which slightly prejudges what's going on here. We don't know exactly what happened. Police are still investigating the cause of the crash and the death, but it's sparked a wider debate around the use. Like, these are bikes that are everywhere in Sydney and Melbourne and across Australia now, often used by kids. In this case, it was a 30-year-old man, so it's not particularly relevant. But I think people are. There's a lot of talk around whether they should be limited in their use, but there's also like a lot of benefits to these bikes. They're allowing kids to get out, see their friends a bit more. For parents, using e-bikes has been great. You see so many parents dropping their kids off on, and some advocates for cycling are now saying, look, what we need to do is actually have better bike paths to protect people out on the road more and not jump to these kind of knee-jerk reactions of, okay, we need to limit e-bikes. So I think there's an interesting debate to be had, aside from obviously this tragedy that's happened this week.
Oh, the culture on the roads in Sydney when it comes to bikes terrifies me. I wouldn't ride a bike, and it's not because I think bikes are unsafe. It's because I think drivers are unsafe. Lenore, what about you? What could you not get out of your head this week?
Mine's a lot less serious, but Spotify Wrapped is obviously the talk of the town. And I'm not sure how I ended up with a music age of 44, but I'll go with it, given that lots of much more hip colleagues ended up with much older ages, like
well, you're 30
100.
years younger than me, Lenore.
But I guess from Spotify's point of view, we're talking about it, and that's what the marketing exercise is for.
Well, what was your top song, Lenore?
It was Sia, Breathe Me.
Great song.
Great song. There was also Blur, Gillian Welch. There were, I looked and went, yep, that's what I've been listening to.
You are very cool.
I am.
I had a lot of CMAT in mine. What about you, Mike? What did you have?
Much less cool. Mine tend to be from the sort of 1980s indie scene. So my top song was by a band called Felt. Very underrated band. I also had This Mortal Coil in my top 5. I did have Groove Armada. I guess, does that count as being cool?
Yeah, that's cool.
I think it's cool.
But I also think it's very Mike Ticher version of cool that you're naming niche bands and songs that I've never heard of. It's very on brand for you. What about you, Patrick? What's your top song?
I don't have Spotify, so I haven't got my Wrapped. But it's funny, I do get to the point where I look at what my top most played songs are, and I finally reached the age, or my children have reached the age where the children's songs don't come up anymore. So there's no, Wiggles or anything in there anymore, which is kind of sad in a way. You look
What a
back and you just go,
milestone.
But then you reach the age where your kids say, Mum, have you ever heard of a band called Fleetwood Mac?